What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. Well, tonight we are continuing our discussion of step 7, and we're looking at the steps through the lens of self-esteem, what we're calling authentic self-esteem or true self-esteem, and how that relates to emotional sobriety. The order that we've been presenting was that Herb Kagan goes first, and Roger follows up with tying this all into Nathaniel Brandon's work on self-esteem, and then Thom Rutledge comes in and he shares, and then I'm the cleanup batter, which would have been next week. But next week, Herb Kagan and I will be traveling to St. Louis to do a weekend workshop on emotional sobriety. So I'm not going to be here, and nor will Herb be here next week. And Herb's not here this evening, as I mentioned, because he's traveling to see his family. So I'm Thom Rutledge tonight, or I'm Alan Berger in Thom Rutledge's position tonight. So I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts about this step, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently than I've been doing it, because I want to step back, because step 7 to me is kind of like halfway through the steps. Even though it's 7, mathematically, it's really not halfway. But I think from a process point of view, it's where we stop focusing on ourself, and in step 8, we're going to be focusing on our relationship with others. And as we've talked about, steps, the 7 steps up to this point, has really been steps that have really focused on our relationship with ourselves, on understanding ourselves more, on getting honest with ourselves. And so I want to talk about that, and I want to kind of put that in a bigger picture, if I can. At least that's what I'm going to attempt to do tonight. Now, those of you that have heard me talk before, is that I believe that the steps create an incredible momentum, and they follow a they follow how we are wired biologically. They're organic in one sense, that they follow a formula that our organism is based on: charge, discharge. The first step creates an incredible charge, right? You know, we admitted we were powerless if we're in AA over alcohol, and that our lives had become unmanageable. Essentially, what it does is step 1 creates this crisis. I've described to you before that it's an existential crisis. Essentially, step 1 says I'm screwed and there's nothing I can do about it, which is a heavy, heavy realization, right? My God, the way I've been functioning, the way I've been living my life, I have all these limitations that I haven't wanted to look at. I've been self-destructive. I've created an existence that is not working very well. That's a big pill to swallow. And it throws us into this existential crisis. We're in trouble, and I'm powerless to do anything about it. I feel helpless. It's not a good place. That's the charge, right? Something needs to happen. Bill Wilson talks about recovery being based upon a pedestal of hopelessness. And that's what happens if we really embrace that step 1. But that charge, we're ready for something. We're ready for something to come along and to make a difference. And that's what step 2 does. Now, step 2 is essentially a message of hope, right? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, that there is a solution out there. I may not know what it is, but there is a possibility that I don't know about it. So at the same time, it resolves the charge and discharges the charge that was created in step one and creates its own charge. Now there's hope. But how do I discover that? How can I make that hope something more personal to me? It's just an idea now, right? I can be restored to sanity, soundness of mind, right? But how can that be real for me? That's the charge that's created in step two. And then step three comes along and says, okay, we'll make a commitment, right? We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. So now Herb likes to talk about is making a decision and return towards a new possibility, towards learning how to live a new life. And so the steps continue to build, creating charge and discharge one after the other, and is building this momentum. Now, you've heard Roger talk a lot about a term that Brandon used called pseudo self-esteem. Pseudo self-esteem. Well, what does that essentially mean? That our self-esteem is based on a set of false principles. What spawns that pseudo self-esteem? Well, that's the context I want to put tonight's discussion in. You see, what spawns that is our false self. We develop a false self very early in life. Now, that comes also out of an attempt to try to ensure our existence. We embrace these ideas of who we should be. We embrace these concepts of who we should be as a solution to our dilemma, our anxiety that we're not going to be loved, we're not going to be accepted, and we're not going to belong. And so this false self that we start to construct is a solution to that anxiety. So we imagine who we have to be, we fantasize who we have to be in order to resolve that anxiety. Now, that gets layered on. Early on, it's a very, very basic, primitive idea of who we have to be. But as we mature and as our consciousness develops, that becomes much more complex, and the shoulds become more and more elaborate. And the way that you can identify your false self is by looking at the shoulds that are governing your life. The should is based on the false self is based on a set of principles that are shoulds. I should be this way to be okay. I should be this way to be loved. I should be this way to be accepted. I should be this way to belong. Now, our self-esteem, if it's an evaluation of ourself, that evaluation for pseudo self-esteem is based on, am I living up to these shoulds? And when I do, I'm proud of myself. I'm proud that I'm just a nice guy all the time, and that none of my needs show up in a relationship, if that's my solution. If my solution is to what we call a self-effacing solution, where I erase myself, then what happens is that I am now basing my pride on this sense of myself that I don't have any needs. That pseudo self-esteem is based on that concept of who we should be. And so when I am the way I think I should be, I'm proud of myself, even though that pride is based on a compromise of who we really are. Because when we dedicate our lives to actualizing a concept of who we should be, we're going to fragment ourselves. It is not based on all of who we are. It's based on very particular parts of ourselves that we think we have to be okay. Now, what the steps do is they begin to deconstruct that false self that we've developed. The first step is wonderful in putting a crack in that whole operation and starting to shatter our reliance on these ideas of who we think we need to be okay. So the deconstruction is occurring through all of the steps. So by time we get to step number 6, we have a very good idea of what our false self looks like and how we've taken many veers from who we want to be or what we can be. You see, at some point in time, we realize that we have lost ourselves. Not only lost ourselves in the disease, which happens, but we've also lost ourselves in this whole false self that we have engineered, that we've created. So when we get to step 6 and 7, where we're entirely ready to have these defects of character removed, right? And humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And step 7 is humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. We are now at this point of saying, help me become who I can really be. Not what I've been, not who I tried to be, but help me become my true self. You see, we can think of our recovery as a recovery of our true self. So step 6 and 7, Bill talks about it as the best possible attitude towards our shortcomings, but I think it's much bigger than that. I think we're being invited to take the best possible attitude towards ourselves, towards our life, towards our relationship with others, towards our relationship with the God of our understanding, and towards life itself. That's the pivot that's taking place in step 6 and 7. It's now we're moving towards what we can be, not what we've been. It's an incredible, important moment in our recovery. I really think of it as these pivoting steps, right? We're pivoting in the direction of this self-actualization. And it's incredibly powerful what happens. As we start to do this, we are now, and Bill even talks about it, we're now building a firm bedrock upon which to build the rest of our life, a foundation for the rest of our life. What makes it a firm bedrock? It's you. Because it's finally, you're basing your life based on who you are, not on who you think you're supposed to be. See, you're never going to be good at being someone you're not, but you can be wonderfully good at being who you are. That's the incredible process that's taking place at this point. So our authentic self, our true self, right, being committed to that is where this true self-esteem or this authentic self-esteem is based on. So now our pride in ourself is based on our authenticity. And it's not a pride where I'm full of myself. It's a pride that's anchored in humility. It's a pride that's based on being accepting of my limitations, accepting my gaps in knowledge, accepting my mistakes, taking and owning those mistakes, taking responsibility for them. So humility creates this authenticity that is now connected to our true self. So what we're really doing is now we're building our character. And this is what Bill said we lost sight of. See, because when before we were constructing our false self, it wasn't about working on who we are. It was working on based on creating ourselves as a commodity that we were going to market to try to get people to love us and to accept us. And now we're letting that go and we're shifting from this having consciousness to a being consciousness. That we're differentiating ourselves from what we have to who we are. And now our pride comes from really true character building and having integrity, which means just wholeness and being committed to being all that I am, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's, I love it. It's really the Popeye the Sailor Man solution. I am what I am. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. That's what's happening for us here. And it's a very, very exciting process that's taking place in our lives. Now, there's wonderful little sections in all of this. He goes, our eyes begin to open to the immense values which come straight out of painful ego puncturing. Now, put it in my terms, is now our eyes open to see that, my God, letting go of this false self of mine is freeing. This is the path to true freedom. Now, I'm okay being who I am. This is, you've heard us talk week after week about the importance of acceptance. That's what this is all about. Until now, our lives have been largely devoted to running from pain and problems. We fled from them as from a plague. We never wanted to deal with the fact of suffering. Character building through suffering might be all right for saints, but it certainly didn't appeal to us. Well, listen, let me do this. Let me deal with my dog right now. And then I'm going to invite Roger in and I'll finish what I have to say. Roger, would you jump in and comment on this and let me handle Rocky?
Sure thing, Al. Sure. Thank you. It's so ironic. I had literally a power failure here in my place in West Los Angeles. Partway into Alan's presentation, everything went black, and Alan was just talking about powerlessness, and I went, "Wow, Alan tuned into my situation here in West LA." Thankfully, the power did return. So I really like a lot how Alan is presenting step 6 and 7 as a movement from both self-focus to relationship focus, but also a movement toward, expansion of myself into an idea of who I can become rather than who I have been. The 12 steps are not therapy, but they, as Alan has pointed out a lot, they are very akin to therapy in the process of learning about ourselves and coming to more deeply understand ourselves, and then using that understanding as a platform, as a springboard to help us move toward new possibilities in our life. And the core of those new possibilities is kind of coming back into my sense of who I've always been. I loved it. As Alan said, I can be wonderfully good at being who I am. I can be wonderfully good at being who I am. In fact, I'm the only person in the known universe who can do that, right? Who can be who I am. One of Nathaniel Branden's earlier books was a book called The Disowned Self, which is an exploration of self-alienation. How in the creation of our false self, we lose touch with our own longings, our own needs, our own emotions, our own desire for connection. And as Alan said, we will try anything and everything to get more love and less punishment or withdrawal from those around us. We become a commodity in the quest for love, as opposed to a search for being, a search for being able to be more true to myself, more true to who I am. Now, all of this is filled with great turmoil and great difficulty from my perspective. That's the cauldron out of which our rediscovery of our true self happens. So, Al, you can pick back up if you've taken care of Rocky's sneeze.
Yeah, Rocky wanted to go outside, and so he was letting it be well known. But I'll just read a few other things. But I just want to say, you see, this is the power of the steps, and I just heard a little bit what Roger was saying. Is in many ways the process does follow the arc of really good therapy. Right? Really good therapy is really going to encourage us to do the inward searching. And it's going to really help us, move towards self-acceptance and let go of some of these ideas of who we think we should be and help us accept ourselves as we are. I mean, that's what all good therapy does. Now, how does this tie into emotional sobriety? I'll address that in a minute. But Roger read this last week, and I think it just really captures what's happening here. Bill says, a great turning point in our lives came when we sought for humility as something we really wanted rather than as something we must have. So you see, the shift that's taking place is away from this false self, where now authenticity was a threat to our false self because it meant that we weren't what we thought we were. It was like the curtain being pulled back in the Wizard of Oz, and here's that little guy standing behind all that equipment and the great and mighty Oz out in front. That's what every one of us is afraid of, that we're going to be found out to be an imposter, a phony. But now we seek owning these things and seeing these things about ourselves, even if they're painful. I've experienced that in my own therapy, in my own program, is to looking at things that there's two responses that goes on. Before it used to be just one of humiliation, and now it's one of, wow, this is important, this is exciting. Now I have some new possibilities. Now, how does all this tie into emotional sobriety? Well, if we think of emotional sobriety as a consciousness of freedom, and that's the way I want you to think about emotional sobriety, as a consciousness of freedom. We are free from the shackles of the self we thought we should be. We're free from the tyranny of the shoulds. We're free from all of that nonsense that we have in our heads about who we have to be okay. And we start to see and realize and live from this place of authenticity, where I can own that I've made a mistake, and that doesn't make me a mistake. I can accept my gaps in knowledge and not be ashamed that I don't know everything, that it's okay to be ignorant. What a freedom it gives us. And as you're going to see, this work we've done now is the gateway into having healthy relationships. And you hear this all the time. A healthy relationship is based on, first, a different relationship with ourselves. And that's what's happening here in this step. And I'll read one more thing, and then I'll ask Raj to make whatever other comments. And then if Tom Rutledge is here to join us, if not, Tom Potash is also going to join us in the discussion tonight. But this is what Nathaniel Brandon says, is to enjoy our own being, to be happy in a profound sense with who we are, to experience the self as worthy of being valued and loved by others. This is the first requirement for growth of romantic love. So it really now starts to open the door for what we're going to be doing in steps 8 and 9 and the rest of the steps. So Tom Potash, would you join us? Tom, did you see, is Tom Rutledge with us tonight?
I am.
Yes,
I'm right
he is.
here.
The magician has
That's
popped up.
what's so funny about that, Roger?
I love how your voice cracked when you said it. It's like
I'm here.
It's like,
I'm here.
that was great, man. Well, I mostly am, but this crack in my voice is hello.
I think
hello.
I think I am.
I think I am. Hello and welcome. You know.
Thanks. Well, let me do just before Potash jumps in here. Let me just because I want to focus on the part you're talking about the before. If we think about this before and after step 7, the before is and the before recovery in general is the conditional self-esteem. And it's like, and that's, and we put it in those terms, I mean, it wouldn't have been all that long ago that I wouldn't have kind of said, okay, well, yeah, self-esteem is going to be conditional because it's, we're trying to measure, we just got to figure out how we're measuring ourselves and that, all that. What we're doing here is when this entire recovery thing becomes, which I think emotional sobriety is, a just amazing daily practice of humility, then it is not, we let go of the conditional. And what I realized as you were talking about it, Alan, is that as I'm always talking about, that when we're off base, when we're not being our best selves, when we're being our false selves, not our authentic selves, we're operating out of a value system that's not ours. We know that when we were in addiction, I was operating out of the addiction's value system, which was more important. Who's more important, your wife or alcohol? It's like, I would say my wife, and I wouldn't mean that, but my behavior would say alcohol, because that's the value system I was actually living from. But now, even with sobriety, now we're talking about the conditional value system is that of the should monster. This guy, so all of a sudden I realized, and I knew he ruled so much of my life before, but the idea that I'm trying to please him in order to have self-esteem, and it's like, whoops. Okay. It's, that's the coolest part, because now it's unconditional. It's what you said. You're the only person who can be, I think you said that, Roger. You're the only person who could be the best Roger in the world. And it's like, and that's what this is about. And it's not about meeting some expectations at all. It's about honesty, and honesty brings us freedom. And we keep coming back to that word over and over again. And that's what this is all about, is freedom, as corny as it sounds, freedom to be who we are. But before we can know that, we have to have the freedom to explore, so we can become more and more increasingly aware of who we really are, because we're already there. It's like we don't have to build a new self. We just have to get to know ourselves.
So great way to say it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. That was fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Thinking about step 7 in the context of what you all have contributed so far, it started to make me think about how, coming into the program, I was told, create your own version of your higher power, right? We have the freedom to do that in steps 2 and 3. What's your ideal higher power? And then it talked about in step 4, when it talked about our sex inventory, what's our ideal in terms of our sex behavior and relationship behavior. And then I think 6 and 7 starts to come into like, well, what's my ideal of myself? And it was the first time I got to realize, like, I get to choose the type of person I want to be. It gives me the freedom to be able to say, okay, what of these values do I want to work towards? And my inventory and my prayer and meditation on my character defects really switched, because it used to be a punitive inventory that I'd be like, don't make me don't make me a liar. I don't want to be a liar anymore. And versus like, I want to be a man of honesty. I want to be a man of service, of love, versus focusing on all the trouble my character defects created, not whitewashing it in a way, but looking towards that true, honest self that I have inside of me, and that kind of, again, swinging towards the true self that Alan brings up. It made me think of I just read some of Bill Wilson's conference speeches that he gave over the years, and where my character defects really come into play is it gives me that honest vision of what's going on. Bill Wilson talked about like how things couldn't have come together, specifically the traditions, if we didn't have trouble, right? The trouble is there to know what to look at, what the opposite of that would look like, and how many troubles they had early on that produced the traditions. And he had this way of describing it. It takes the divine and the sordid in order to make progress. And I just love that way, because if I didn't have the sordid to begin with, not necessarily looking at it as a punishment, but of like, oh, that's kind of painful, and I don't want to do that again, or at least not quite as much. And then the other piece of it, which Alan touched on, I'll go the sentence before it, is he said, we saw we needn't always be bludgeoned and beaten into humility. It could come quite as much from our voluntary reaching for it as we could from unremitting suffering. And I don't know where that teeter-totter tipped for me, but just the idea that I didn't have to bang my head against the wall quite so often, right? That there was a choice there. And I think that's the awakening of the spirit, this kind of better understanding of what these true qualities have as a benefit. And I think Alan talked about they're no longer a threat to my ego-based self or false self. It's this idea that hey, this is really me under all this crap, and I want that more, because I start to get the benefits of it, and of being more like what I was intended to be, and that all leads to having better relationships, and this is something I bring up to sponsees or whoever will listen to me, is the substance is only talked about in the first half of the first step. The rest is all about relationships. It's about me and my higher power and my relationships with the outside world. And this is the progression that this starts pushing us through, because I can do this work all alone sitting in my house, but until I get out into the real world, that's when I know that's actually having an effect on me. I recently started a daily practice. I added a new meditation and prayer into my repertoire in my mornings, and at the same time I got called back to the office. This was a big corporate thing. It's like, well, praying to love everybody's fine when it's just me and my dog, right? Getting out into the streets of Manhattan and taking the subway and all that. Then I get to see it, really just how much my character defects are popping up when I put them into the mix of everyday life, and again, not running from them when they do crop up, because they just it's trouble, and it's worth taking a look at what arose for me. So I love step 7. I love that Bill Wilson's writing on it. I think that thankfully we give it a really good look through in about whatever it's been, 4 or 5 weeks of examination, and I appreciate joining the conversation tonight.
So one other thing, and then I'll give you some space, Raj, if you wanted to add something from what you said. See, the other thing, the way I see this step is this is the step now. In step 6, we're getting ready, right? Ready to have these defects removed. Step 7 is about taking responsibility, start doing something about it. We're asking for, they asked him to remove our shortcomings. It's now we're taking our insight and we're putting it into action. We're getting help. we're
Daily,
learning to-
daily. That's the other thing see, that's the thing. It's not something you go through and okay, now I'm completed this step. It's like, no, this step. I mean, all of them are tools. So you don't say I finished the 12 steps and do that. But especially with 7, it's like, you do step 7 every day of your life.
It's
if
not
you're
theoretical.
doing it. Yeah, absolutely. And it's how we, what you're saying too, Tom, is basically if you don't fuck up, how do you learn? And I have, I can probably honestly say that of the 4 of us on the screen, we have lots of material to work with.
Well, and see what a difference. Instead of avoiding ourselves, we're now facing ourselves, taking responsibility for ourselves, and now constructing a whole different life.
Yep.
It's just, it's really an amazing thing. I every week, Alan T, who shows up to our meetings all the time, puts in a passage from the Narcotics Anonymous literature, and please go to the chat and read what he put in today. NA has a wonderful way of expressing some of the stuff that's going on. So Raj, do you want to add something before we invite others to share?
Yeah, a couple of additional thoughts. I really like what you said about that. It's a combination of the divine and the sordid that we come out of, right? And that's what I mentioned when I mentioned there's a lot of difficulty, there's a lot of struggle, because here's something very important. I think all of us, to one degree or another, every last one of us as human beings, go through this process of creating a false self, of creating an idealized self, of getting to a point in our lives where we're very, very alienated from who we are at the level of our being.
Right.
And so there's something that makes sense at some level about having to deconstruct our false self and run into all those parts of ourselves that we have learned to judge and condemn and devalue and push away, and having to reconfront them and get to know who we are at a much deeper level. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention, is there's a real normalcy in a way to the process of becoming as messed up in our own ways, our own unique ways as we become, and then having to unravel this puzzle and find solutions that work better for us. I found that idea to be helpful to me in not judging all parts of that process, including the creation of the idealized self, of the false self. In talking about this, as I slowly, in my case, learn to become more of an ally to myself and give more support and encouragement to myself in my life, the meaning of Carl Rogers' words, an early psychotherapist, a really good therapist and wise man, that quote, "What I am is good enough if I would only be it openly." And he's not talking about going and acting out all of my worst impulses in myself. He's talking about taking ownership of all parts of who I am and being willing to bring them first up to the light within myself, up to my own awareness, and then with those I feel safe enough to do so with, and that gets that encompasses more and more people as I become more self-accepting, right? Because I'm so much less fearful about how I'm going to be evaluated by others. But it becomes more and more real to me when Alan said I can be wonderfully good at being who I am. That means wherever I am at a given moment, whether I'm feeling depressed, whether I'm feeling anxiety filled, whether I'm feeling resentful, that's good enough. I don't have to act it out on other people, right? Hopefully. But even if I do that sometimes, that's forgivable as well. That's being human. But I wanted to make that point. As I grow in self-acceptance, I grow in this ability to let myself be the reality, the truth of who I am in more and more situations and more people with my life, which is freedom, which is a gift. So thanks for bringing it back around, Al. I appreciate it. And that's all I wanted to add for tonight.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps that they're old fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.